Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Brave Conversation. Today, I have with me Paul Green, the ex-pilot of Flybe. Now, what does an ex-pilot do when the aviation industry is basically locked down? And this is exactly why I invited Paul to the show. I mean, he's been featured on the BBC, but the whole message here is try to understand how to pivot using your transferable skills into something new. Hi, Paul. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, well, it's not been an easy year for you. Can you tell us a little bit what's happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been flying for Flybe for the last year, and in March, unfortunately, we got the horrible news to tell us that we'd been made redundant. The airline had collapsed. We were the first real victim of COVID. So yeah, crazy times. And for me, it was my second redundancy from the aviation industry. So it's a very volatile industry. A lot can happen, a lot can change overnight, as has done twice. So for me, it was about moving quite quickly, finding something new, finding something different, using my skills, and that's where the cockpit method came from.
Exactly. And apparently you did try before inventing the cockpit method, which we'll talk about later. You did try to get other jobs, obviously, and you've just realized how unqualified you are. Tell us more about that. I mean, what's been the
Yeah,
difficulty? Because you think that, aviation industry is one thing, but being a pilot, I mean, that's really something, right? You think you'd be marketable for other things, wouldn't you?
yeah. I think part of it is through being a pilot, and part of it is the current climate as well, which doesn't really help. But yeah, so as you said, once I lost my job at Flybe, I did as many people would do. I took to the internet and I immediately tried to find any jobs I could. I applied for a store manager job for a mobile phone company. They had 500 applicants. I didn't even get past the initial screening stage. Um, yeah, I applied for many jobs, and the response I was getting time and time again was that I just wasn't qualified. I applied for a minimum wage job in a call center, and they said I had no customer service experience, which is mad. You think of a pilot as the person behind the cockpit on the interphone talking to passengers. The amount of times I've had to deal with passenger incidents, and I've stepped into the cabin and spoken to passengers face to face. But I think people don't think of that side of it when they're looking at your CV. They just look at the facts of what's there. I fly an aeroplane. I'm a technical person. I'm not. It's not a customer facing role, so therefore I'm underqualified for most of the jobs out there at the moment.
And I think it's also the climate, as you said, because there aren't as many jobs available at this time. So competing with 500 people or whatever, however many hundred that was, they would have probably just wanted to have someone that was closer to the industry. So it's a twofold, right? It's like double whammy type of thing. You got hit by the COVID, the aviation industry thing, and the job market. So what was the turning point? When did you decide to say, you know, screw this, I'm just going to do my own business? What happened?
So we sat. Me and my wife sat down and we looked at my skills. There were a couple of aviation jobs that were coming up. There was a job that came up in Kazakhstan, which would have been involved me going out to Kazakhstan for 3 months and then coming back to the UK for a month. Things like that for me, just as much as I wanted to be flying, they just didn't have the same appeal. The thought of, first of all, being in Kazakhstan, it's so far away from home in many respects, not just distance. Um, Realistically, my family probably wouldn't have come to visit me out there. It would have been me being the one traveling around, coming back here. So those things just didn't really seem like an option. So we looked at my transferable skills, looked at what I had to offer. Um, for me, it looked like there were many opportunities in terms of the job market, but obviously, as we discussed, it just wasn't happening. So it seemed like the logical step for me was to set up my own business, to use those skills in some way to try and provide support for others. And I think with the climate at the time, with COVID coming in, businesses were suffering, people were just stumbling through day to day. And the amount of times I would sit there and think, if this was me flying, if this was a flying situation, how would I have dealt with this? Would I have ever let it get to this point? And of course, everyone was at the mercy of COVID. But, when you talk about businesses pivoting and trying to do different things, as a pilot, we would have always made those kind of decisions before we even left the ground. Whereas businesses, if we use an aviation analogy, they are charging through the air at 600 miles an hour, 40,000 feet, trying to deal with something that maybe could have been dealt with on the ground. So I just saw that as a way in, really, that there was something there, there was something of value that I could add that hopefully would really help people kind of weather the storm a bit.
Right. And tell me about transitioning from employee to entrepreneur first before we talk about the Cockpit Method. Was that strange for you, or were you always quite entrepreneurial?
Um, it was hard in certain ways. Before I got into flying, I used to work in the entertainment industry. I was a freelance theatre lighting designer, so I was quite used to the freelance lifestyle. I was used to being my own boss. But in the theatre world, you work on project to project, so it's very much timetabled, and obviously everything in aviation is incredibly rigid. So being in control of my own time was probably the thing I struggled with most initially. In those first couple of weeks, I was doing 7-day weeks, 14 hours a day, and I was genuinely on the edge of burnout at one point. I was suffering because I didn't know how to stop. For me, up until then, my job was you do the job until it's complete. As a pilot, you can't get halfway through the day and say, I'm tired. I need to stop. You see the project out. And I think that was kind of the mentality I took into setting up my own business. So it was really, really difficult in those early days. I had the benefit of working with 2 coaches, which was brilliant, who they both used to be pilots themselves and set up their own coaching company. So it was really good to work with them. And we had regular chats every week where they said, just stop, just take some time off, sort yourself out, do the self-care stuff before you charge into business. There's kind of no rush really to do this, and that's how I try and work now, really.
That's good. That's good. It's interesting because there's another type of entrepreneur that they don't know when to start, because there's the kids, the dog, the house, the everything, and there's so many distractions. Whereas in their office, they're used to just clunking down and working. Here, it's
Yeah.
I can't believe I haven't started, and it's 12:30, and and where's
Yeah.
the time gone? And for you, you couldn't stop. That's good. So tell me about the Cockpit Method. What is it, and what transferable skills were you using when you created that?
So the Cockpit Method splits kind of into 2 areas, really, and it's 2 areas I wanted to keep separate for a reason. So the Cockpit Method is coaching and consulting on everything I've learned in the aviation industry and trying to transfer it to businesses. So we specifically look at risk management, decision making, communication, and more recently venturing into well-being. And we deliver it in a few different ways. So we can deliver it as a full package. So we can spend a whole day with a team of people and talk them through all the steps that we use as pilots. The reason it's the Cockpit Method is I've split all of these areas down into simple single methods. When we fly in the commercial cockpit, we have checklists that we use for everything. Everything is checklisted, and you don't do something unless it's on a checklist. And the way we're trained is that you just need this one piece of paper to do anything. And that was my philosophy with creating the Cockpit Method. So if you're trying to do one of the decision-making models, there is a sheet of A4 paper that has all the steps for that method on. And the idea is that nobody would ever need anything other than that sheet of paper. And I take that all the way through. I think that's one of the most important things. You don't want to get bogged down with paperwork and trying to figure out how things are. And so the idea is, once we've given you the training and we've taken you through, this thing lasts for life. It's one simple method that will guide you through the rest of your business career. The other side of the business is the Cockpit Method in health and social care. So we're working in particular with the NHS, but we're working across the health and social care sector, and that is just delivering well-being. The philosophy behind it is, the vast majority of well-being training that people receive is they will tell you to remove the stressful factor from your life or step away from the stressful situation, give yourself the breathing space. And for 90% of the world, that works, and it works really well. It doesn't work for a pilot because, if I'm at 40,000 feet somewhere over the Atlantic and I have a fire, I can't remove the stressful situation, and I can't remove myself. I have to deal with it, and it has to be dealt with coping strategies. And it's exactly the same with the NHS. I watched a documentary with the lead virologist based in Oxford who's delivering the COVID vaccine. And this guy has lost so much weight over the last 6 months. He's not sleeping properly, he's not eating properly, he's not seeing his family. But he has the key in his hand to curing COVID. So if you tell him to take a break, he's not going to listen. He's not going to step away from his job. He's in it, and he's in it for the long run. So how do we help those people? And that's where that side of the business came from for me, that I wanted to provide the same sort of support that we get as pilots to benefit that industry.
Wow. Okay. Well, I like it. It's I do a lot of corporate training, and I've been doing this for a dozen or more years. But it is sometimes you get these kinds of people that come in with different kind of methods, and for you to have created that and thought, as a pilot, I've learned a lot of things, and there's a lot of skills, particularly about handling decisions and stress that could be useful for the general public, is quite innovative. Because if you think about it, a surgeon has a checklist, but if he doesn't follow or she doesn't follow the checklist, they're not the one that dies. But if you don't follow your checklist, the whole plane goes down and you're in it, right? So there is always that comparison, and yeah, that whole checklist method also, I can imagine, makes things simple, so it's not overly complicated or intuitive. It's just straightforward. This is what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think businesses need that right now. Businesses don't need anything extra adding to their workload. People want quick solutions to problems, and I'm not saying what I create is necessarily a quick solution, but the resources certainly are simple and easy to use. I say, with the decision making part of it, if you spend an hour with me, I can teach you how to use this 6-step process that will just guide you through every single decision to make sure that you're digging deep into the problem that you're in. We regularly talk about scratching the surface of a problem, and I think that's what most businesses are doing right now. They see something quite small and go, oh, that's obviously the problem, let's fix that. And then further down the line, there's something much, much deeper. The analogy I always use with my clients is, one of the very, very first times I was in the simulator, so in a commercial jet in a simulator doing training, we were given an engine fail in flight. So the left engine had failed. So we immediately looked at it and said, right, the engine's failed. This is us scratching the surface. Let's get the checklist out for an engine failure. We'll run the checklist. We'll look at it. We'll deal with it. We dealt with the problem. The problem was fine. We kept on flying. And actually what had happened is we had a fuel leak. So the underlying problem was a fuel leak, and that engine was being starved of fuel. But because we didn't dig deep enough, because we just looked at the superficial problem, we then had a second engine fail further on in flight because we had no fuel left. And it was an amazing lesson to just think, if that was the real world, that's 250 people's lives in your hands, and you have made a really simple mistake much, much bigger just by not diagnosing it in the first place. And I think businesses, it is exactly the same for business. We talk about the life or death situations, but right now this is people's lives we're dealing with. If you misdiagnose a situation and you make redundancies, that's people's lives in your hands. You are ruining people's lives, unfortunately. So I think it's really important to dig deep and solve problems, not just the superficial things that we see in front of us.
Yeah, and then every industry has their own problems. Every department has their own problems. But in my experience also, when I was turning around businesses and coaching businesses, it's a set of the same questions that can help you dig. There is a pattern to diagnosing a problem, even though the problem can be a variety of things. So you don't need to be an expert in every industry, but it does take a certain type of head. It's the start of a type of brain to just say, okay, what is the questions that I need to ask? So when I used to turn around businesses as well, and then I used to have to groom my staff to take over my position in 18 months because I have to move on to another project. I always taught them the questions, the way of thinking, not necessarily the solutions, because the solutions could be anything. But yeah, it seems like that's a very key transferable skill that you have in business, and you do that in decision making. I can imagine that being applied to, as you said, risk taking. There's a lot of
Mhm.
people right now uncomfortable with uncertainty. Uncertainty for you is like every day as you take off.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So is it like the same model also with the risk taking? You give them a way of thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, risk management comes down to one simple question, and it's the question we always ask before every single flight, and it is, what is different today? It's really easy to talk about briefing in particular. We do staff briefings, and it's really easy to say, so how are we going to fly this flight today? And the person I'm sat next to has the exact same qualification as I have. We both know how to fly the aeroplane. We don't need to talk about that. We don't need to talk about how we're going to fly. And it's the same in business. Some people need to have their diary read out to them, but not everybody needs to have their diary read. So, you know, why do we use those things when we're briefing? Why don't we talk about the things that are important and the things that are going to catch us out? Which is why in aviation, that is every day, that's the question. What is different today? What is the one thing, if I can pinpoint one thing today that's going to take me by surprise, what is it? Because once you know what that is, it can't take you by surprise. So you can mitigate it before it's even happened. And for me, obviously there's a lot more to risk management than just that. But I think if you can nail that one fundamental question and that mindset of thinking ahead and thinking, what is going to kill me today? What's going to kill my business? You're ready for it as soon as it happens.
Exactly. And it may not be a wet runway for us, but it could be, you know what? I just had a really bad night and I didn't get enough sleep. And internally, what's different with me today is me,
Yeah,
right? My own state of mind. And yeah, once you name the devil, it's no longer the devil, right? It's like
yeah,
no longer a
absolutely.
surprise. Yeah, that's great. The well-being part was interesting because when we were chatting just before this, you were talking about a different approach. Yeah, you're right. I mean, when I see well-being training, it's always do this, do that, don'ts and do's. But my question is, well, okay, I've tried it, but I still go back to my old habit for some strange reason. How do you overcome that?
For me, it's about knowledge. Um, in the aviation industry, we're given knowledge for well-being. So we're told, it's called human factors training. So it's about the human element with all of these things. So rather than saying to somebody, you need 7 or 8 hours sleep every single night to function the next day, we're told how that works and how you calculate it. So without going into too much detail on it and getting too complicated, if you imagine you have a piggy bank, and the way the piggy bank works is for every hour you sleep on a night, you put 2 credits into your piggy bank. And then for every hour that you're awake, you take 1 credit out of the piggy bank. You can only ever have a maximum of 16 credits in that piggy bank, which is 8 hours sleep. But you don't need to have 8. So if you need to work for 10 hours, so if you need 10 hours of useful brain space in one day, then you need 5 hours sleep. It is that simple. But we're not told that, and we don't get told that. So for me, it's about giving that knowledge, and that's how I work in the NHS. I give them the knowledge to say, look, these are all these different bits. This is how stress works. This is how you break down stress. This is what your body's doing. This is how fatigue works. These are all the different elements of sleep, exactly like the piggy bank. And this is how general well-being works. And then we go into more of a coaching session to say, so which of these bits work for you? Which bits of this do you need to work on? What can benefit you in your day-to-day life, personally and professionally? Because I think that's the other side of it for me. We tend to, especially in big organizations, we look at the professional element because the company wants numbers. In the NHS, they want sick days reduced. They want more staff on duty, less people taking time off. And we don't really think about the personal element beside of it. For big organizations, they don't care if you work flat out for 5 days and then you're 2 days off, you're in bed recovering. That doesn't bother them. But it does for me. And I think that's really important in general well-being, in having complete well-being, is that the personal and the professional sit side by side, and that if you nurture the professional life, and nurture the personal life at the same time, you're going to get a much more holistic view of that person, and they're much more likely to succeed in their professional life, just by kind of helping them through it, really.
And it's also getting their buy-in, because with knowledge, you're more empowered to make those decisions by yourself, right? If I know how, radiation from phone works and how that affects my brain and why it doesn't help me sleep, then I can make my own decision to put my phone away, instead of saying, this is the list of do's and don'ts, and then trying to find my own little loophole.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely.
It's almost understanding the why, understanding how things work, and then giving back that ownership to the staff or the employee, rather than becoming that management that says do and don't. Do you
Yeah.
find that, how have you found that? I mean, because I know you're working with certain projects with the NHS, especially NHS, because those are, again, those people who can't just say, I'm going to leave my stress factors now.
Yeah,
You got to deal with it. How's that working now?
it's working really well, and I think exactly like you said, the fact that they can't just step away from the stressful situation is the thing that's kind of the most valuable to them, that somebody's actually sitting down and listening to them talk about what works. I had a really interesting conversation the other day with a group of 15 nurses, and they were split down the middle, well, as much as you can be when it's 15. But half of them were talking
One
about,
of them was very indecisive.
yeah, absolutely. They were talking about finishing work. So when they're all working from home, and when their duty day finishes, for most of them it's at 5 o'clock, it's really hard to switch off. As many business owners are finding right now, when you're working from home, it's impossible to stop. So half of them were saying, we really need to stop at 5 o'clock every day on the dot. Does it matter if that email is unsent and we don't send it until the next morning? And then the other half of them were saying, but actually, I would be really anxious all night knowing that there was an email that I wanted to send and I haven't sent it. And I think they were really shocked when I said to them, that's okay. That's fine. That's fine to feel like that. Both of those are completely valid points, because that's what's right for you. I can imagine if I was one of their managers and I said, no, you have to turn off your computer at 5 o'clock because that's when you finish. It's not going to work. You're going to have half of your staff being really anxious that they haven't finished, or exactly like you said, they're just not going to listen. They're going to find a loophole. They're going to turn their computer off and then come back to it 2 hours later when nobody's really paying attention, and then that's eating into their personal life. I think that empowerment is really powerful, that you can say to them, it's okay to do this. It's okay to take control, to do what you want to do and what's right for you. But it's about it being an informed decision, that they are the ones taking control. They're not being told to do this, that it has to come from within. And I think that for me is the key to well-being, is being able to say, this is what I need and this is what I'm going to do.
And I guess if someone persists on being a workaholic, and no, for me, it works that I turn my computer off at 9 o'clock at night, because that works for me. And 3 hours of sleep works for me. And that's my conscious decision. Then I guess hopefully that what they'll realize is the root cause of their problem is that they don't have a goal for wellness.
Yeah.
That their goal for wellness is status quo, or is a stressful life. And as long as they are willing to accept the consequences of that, there isn't really anything else that a coach can do anyway, right?
No.
And some people, you just have to have the process, but have that awareness. Where's this actually coming from? That mindset of not having a goal for wellness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always say, you can only help somebody who wants to be helped.
Yeah.
The NHS can put people onto my training course and they can come and sit there for 3 hours and I can talk to them about well-being. I would always hope that at least take one thing away from it that might change how they work. But you're always going to get a hero. You're always going to get somebody who just wants to push through. And it's really difficult for me, because you see it laid out in front of you. They're on the path to burnout. And I've been there myself. I've been so close to burnout that you don't realize until it's too late, and then it hits you. But for me, there's a lesson there as well. I would have never realized I was on my way to burnout until days before it happened, and I was in bed for a couple of days because I was sort of deflated, and it was just really hard to get through it. I was just exhausted. Some people need to get to that point, and some people learn the lesson that way. And again, that's okay. If that's how they learn, that's unfortunately that is how it happens.
Yeah. Well, I help a lot of people through to understanding their conditioning as well, because sometimes it is a conditioning. I come from an Asian
Yeah,
background. Work is what we do. We're
yeah,
very good at it. But it's also about watching your parents work until nighttime and not having a balance of life, and said, this is, if you want to be a successful person, this is it. And then I know some clients, they have this attachment to work also because it is their way of showing that they want to make their parents proud or whatever it is. It's an unconscious conditioning. When you raise that up to the surface and they realize it, then they can make informed decisions to stay or to leave. But there's this also Asian saying that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. So you're right. You can take a horse to water, but you can't force him to drink.
absolutely.
Yeah. So
And this stuff has to come from the top as well. And I think that exactly summarizes what you were just saying, that you can have a manager who's chasing around staff saying, turn your computer off at 5 o'clock. But if that manager doesn't do the same thing, then, you have to lead by example. And that's something I'm really kind of trying to embed deep into the work I'm doing, that anybody I'm working with, I'm saying to them, you're not just commissioning this course. You're not just commissioning me to come in and deliver this training. Like, you have to buy into this. You have to buy into the philosophy behind this training. Otherwise, it's never going to work.
yeah, absolutely. It's great. It's great having you on this brave conversation. And I think it's great what you do. If people want to find out more about you, where should they go?
So it's thecockpitmethod.com. And yeah, all the details to contact me are all on there.
Yeah. And then, we can always find you. Your name is quite easy to spell. It's Paul Green, right?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although if you want to find me on LinkedIn, as I think you found out, it's better to search for the Cockpit Method and find me that way, as you'll
Okay.
just get 50,000 Paul Greens on LinkedIn.
That's true. That's true. I did have to private message. I was like, is this you?
Yeah.
Thankfully, you had a picture of you, not like your dog or your puppy or something like that. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's quite important, isn't it?
yeah, no, it's Brave Conversations is always about featuring self-employed professionals. And I think at this time, especially, I make an effort to do that because it is so interesting. It's interesting for me to learn from you, but it's also important, I think, for us to support people who have been impacted by the pandemic and give them a platform to share their mission and message and their new business, and learn from you really, but how you pivot and how you figure this out. So kudos to you.
Oh, thank you.
A real kudos to your wife as well for being your
Yeah.
sparring partner on this. So I think you'll do very well, and I think what you've got is really interesting. So
Oh, thank you very much.
a final question:
Go for it.
if Flybe offered you a job as a pilot, would you go back?
Oh, that's such an interesting question.
Or maybe another airline, would you go back to?
Yeah. Well,
And
interestingly, flying.
you can't do both. I've got to make that question difficult.
Oh no.
Oh, I'm gonna part-time. No, it's one or the other.
Do you know, that is really interesting, because we did have this conversation recently, me and my wife, because Flybe have just been bought. So they are going to be coming back next year. And we have talked about me going part-time. Where it's really difficult for me is my identity in the work I'm doing is rooted in me being a pilot. And I think there will be a point where there will be no relevance in what I'm teaching, because I am teaching how a pilot works. And to not be a pilot would be a really difficult part of that. I feel so much more fulfilled now than I potentially did when I was flying, like completely fulfilled, my entire life. Of course, when I was flying, I loved it. And I loved, the 4 or 5 hours that I was actually in the air, was amazing and some of the best times of my life. But I feel completely fulfilled now, and being able to really help people is amazing for me. I think if I had to choose one of them, I'd probably stick with what I'm doing now with the business. But I do think the pilot identity needs to stay there for this to have the value that it has right now.
Well, I think 8 years in the aviation industry, not just as a pilot, but as many other roles, has given you plenty of experience to do what you do. And being with the kids and the wife and everything, and being grounded with them, will give you a different, I'm sure has already given you a different kind of fulfillment.
Yeah, absolutely.
So all the best in what you do, Paul, and thank you for sharing with us the Cockpit Method. And yeah, all the best. Good luck.
Thank you very much.